Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into a world of flickering torches, drafty stone corridors, and the unmistakable rustle of fabric so heavy it could double as a tent. You're standing inside a medieval great hall, smoky from the hearth, full of murmurs, the air dense with the scent of roasted meat, candle wax, and something less polite that no one wants to name. This isn't the Middle Ages from your high school textbook. It's the living, breathing catwalk of a time when people truly believed fashion could define their soul, their social worth, and maybe even their afterlife. You probably won't survive this runway, at least not without a few wardrobe malfunctions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let us see how far tonight's journey stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there, surrounded by nobles, swishing past in brocade and velvet, each trying to outdo the next in shimmer and silhouette. Candles drip wax onto tablecloths, embroidered with gold thread, and in a corner, a musician's lute note wobbles, uncertain. Like it too, is intimidated by all this excess. You tug on your borrowed tunic, too tight across the shoulders, too long in the sleeves, and realize that medieval clothing wasn't about comfort. It was armor of another kind, a social costume you couldn't escape. In this dim hall, everyone's outfit tells a story. The nobleman in crimson velvet? He's flaunting a dye so rare it might have cost him a small castle. The merchant's wife in linen, edged with silk? She's signaling that her husband's profits are flowing. Even the jester, with bells sewn onto every limb, wears status, the license to break all the rules, so long as he amuses those who make them. A mainstream historical fact you should know. During much of the Middle Ages, clothing was legally tied to class. England's 1363 sumptuary laws dictated exactly who could wear what. If you were a commoner, you might be fined, or worse, for daring to wear fur or imported fabrics. So when you look around this hall, every shimmering sleeve is a declaration of privilege. Historians still argue whether these laws were genuinely enforced or merely symbolic reminders of a rigid social ladder, but the fear of crossing that invisible fabric line kept most people in place. You move toward the fire, where the heat brings out the gleam in the velvet cloaks. Velvet? Ah yes, that miracle weave of softness and shimmer. Imported from Italy, it was as rare as TikTok-free attention spans. Imagine spending months' wages on a single yard just to prove you were above wool. And then, just when velvet became the height of noble fashion, along came the absurdly stiff brocade, heavy enough to double as armor. Practical? Not remotely. Fabulous? Undeniably. A servant passes, carrying a jug of ale, his tunic plain and brown, stitched without decoration. You can tell at a glance that he's not meant to be noticed. But look closer. Under the soot, his belt buckle shines just a bit too bright. A tiny rebellion, perhaps. A reminder that fashion's pull reaches even those forbidden to indulge. A quirky, historical tidbit. In some towns, servants were required to dye their clothes a dull shade of gray-blue to make them respectably invisible. Imagine having to legally look boring. And yet, despite the pomp, there's an odd intimacy here. The flicker of firelight on polished fabric. The hush of whispering silk. You start to see why medieval fashion became so bizarre. It wasn't just vanity, it was a way to carve identity in a world that barely recognized individuality. Every ridiculous hat, every too long sleeve, every jeweled button was a small rebellion against anonymity. Now, notice that even within this hall, fashion tells time. The older lords wear long, heavy robes, symbols of patience and authority. The younger ones strut in shorter tunics, cut scandalously high, flaunting their calves like influencers chasing likes. One coughs, flicking the lace at his wrists dramatically. It's impossible not to imagine the medieval equivalent of an Instagram reel captioned, "Sumptuous Saturday." You edge closer to the dais, where the host, a baron with a beard that could conceal a family of wrens, raises his goblet. His robe glitters with embroidered suns and lions. Embroidery wasn't just decoration, it was a language. Every stitch told of allegiance, wealth, or spiritual devotion. Some embroidery took months to complete, and only a few privileged hands ever touched silk thread. Yet in this hall, it's everywhere, gleaming like currency. As you linger, you start to notice the contradictions. The rich stench of unwashed bodies, cloaked in perfumed oils, the glimmering garments patched underneath with rough cloth, the beauty perched precariously on discomfort. The same nobles who boast of divine favor through golden sleeves are sweating, itching, and occasionally fainting from the heat of their own finery. Medieval glamour was not for the weak-limbed. And here's the fascinating thing. Fashion was never still. Each generation thought the previous one looked absurd. Chroniclers from the 14th century mocked the 13th century's flowing robes. The 15th century sneered at the 14th's pointed shoes. Historians still argue whether medieval people knew how strange they looked, or if we're the ones distorting their style through modern eyes. But one thing is certain. They were fully aware of being watched. You glance at a tapestry hanging behind the dais. It shows knights jousting, maidens watching, banners fluttering, an early advertisement for the same ideals these garments project. It's all theater. From the hall to the hem, you realize medieval fashion wasn't simply about clothes. It was about spectacle, a 24/7 pageant of self-worth. And yet, amid the grandeur, the flicker of something human remains. The woman adjusting her too heavy headdress, the boy whose hose don't quite match, the knight whose jeweled belt hides a frayed edge. Beneath the showmanship, there's always the small, private truth. Clothes itch, shoes pinch, and everyone, yes, even the nobility, sometimes just wants to change into something comfortable. You smile to yourself, letting your gaze wander back across the hall, and the scene seems to shimmer, as if on the edge of dream and memory. The fire pops, scattering sparks like gold thread unraveling into the night. You're standing at the threshold of centuries where vanity, faith, and survival will intertwine in silk, wool, and velvet. The music softens, your eyelids grow heavier, and the whisper of fabric becomes a lullaby of history. The bizarre journey has only just begun. You wake to the sound of fabric rustling, an endless, papery whisper. The hall is gone. Now you're in a chilly courtyard at dawn, breath misting, as servants carry buckets of water to a wooden tub that's seen better centuries. You realize you're about to learn the uncomfortable truth. Medieval fashion wasn't all silk and shimmer. Beneath those regal layers lurked the true daily grind. Wool, grime, and lice. You reach down and pinch the hem of your tunic. It's coarse, scratchy, and smells faintly of sheep. Congratulations, you're wearing the medieval default fabric. Wool. Forget the fine silks of Venice. This was the fabric of survival. Wool kept people warm, even when soaked, and it was relatively easy to produce. A mainstream fact. By the 12th century, England's wool trade had become so lucrative, it practically funded wars and cathedrals. Monasteries even bred sheep specifically for softer fleece, turning monks into unlikely fashion moguls. But let's not romanticize it. You shift, and the wool tugs at your skin like a persistent cactus. Beneath that, you've got linen, the underwear layer, intended to protect your more delicate parts from the wool's wrath. Only, it doesn't do much when you haven't bathed for, well, let's say a while. Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly filthy or just differently clean. Bathhouses existed, but by the late Middle Ages, they'd gained a reputation for less hygienic, more scandalous activities. You, dear listener, might want to skip the communal tub and settle for a bucket rinse. A woman nearby shakes out a freshly laundered chemise, slapping it against a rock. It's barely white, more the color of oat porridge, but it's the cleanest thing you've seen all day. She wrings it out and hangs it beside tunics, hose, and a mysterious object that looks like a giant cloth pretzel. It's actually a head wrapping, used to protect against cold and lice. Yes, lice. Everyone had them, even queens. A quirky tidbit. Some noble women kept pet lapdogs, not for companionship, but to attract fleas away from their owners. Imagine patting your pup goodnight and whispering, "Thanks for taking one for the team." You scratch your scalp reflexively. Bad idea. A servant walks by carrying a wooden comb and a candle. She tilts your head and starts combing near the flame. Crackle, sizzle. That's right. She's burning lice, one by one. You try not to flinch. It's oddly hypnotic, this little dance between cleanliness and chaos. Then you notice something beautiful. Despite the hardships, there's pride in even the simplest garments. That servant's tunic might be rough spun, but it's neatly mended. A patch here, a stitched repair there, tiny acts of defiance against poverty. In an age where most people owned only 2 sets of clothing, sewing wasn't just a chore, it was survival couture. You look around. A blacksmith strides past, sleeves rolled up, the hems singed from sparks. His wife wears a gown laced tightly at the sides, sleeves detachable for washing. Yes, detachable sleeves. Fashion's first modular innovation. She grins as she trades them out for cleaner ones. You can almost hear the medieval version of an infomercial. New, wash your sleeves while you work. Nearby, a monk tends his garden in a plain habit. Wool, undyed, brown or gray, depending on his order. To him, simplicity equals holiness. Yet, ironically, his robes are tailored with great care. Perfectly even stitches, precise folds. The contradiction is almost poetic. Rejecting luxury through expert craftsmanship, you follow a group of children down to the river, where they splash barefoot, holding up their rough woolen skirts. Their laughter rings out across the water, light and defiant. The fabric clings to their legs as they wade, stiff but durable. Medieval clothing might itch and stink, but it endures. And endurance was fashion's true foundation. Historians still argue whether commoners cared about trends at all, or if practicality completely ruled their wardrobes. Some records suggest peasants eagerly copied upper-class styles. when they could afford it. Shorter tunics, brighter dyes, maybe a decorative belt. Others insist most rural folks simply didn't have the time or money to chase fashion. The truth, like that muddy river, is probably somewhere in between. You pause to watch a tailor at work in the corner of the courtyard. His hands move fast, threading linen cords through a doublet's eyelets. He's muttering about fabric shrinkage, because yes, even in the 1300s, laundry disasters were real. One misplaced wash, and your best tunic becomes a crop top. He doesn't laugh about it, though. Cloth was expensive. Every inch mattered. A merchant strides in, his outer cloak trimmed with rabbit fur, a clear flex of wealth in a time when sumptuary laws dictated who could wear which furs. The tailor eyes him, but says nothing. Everyone knows the rule. The richer you are, the more layers you get away with. And the merchant, always conscious of appearances, pats his cloak proudly. You start to feel the weight of it all. The constant awareness of how much fabric meant. Wool meant survival. Linen meant cleanliness. Silk meant power. And every thread told others who you were before you even spoke. As the sun rises higher, you notice something endearing. Color. Even the poorest garments aren't purely brown. There are faded greens from onion skins, rusty oranges from madder roots, blues from woad. The dyes aren't perfect. They blotch and fade, but they show that people wanted beauty, even in the muck. A small patch of crimson on a peasant child's tunic glows like rebellion against drabness. The smell of smoke drifts by. Someone's drying freshly dyed wool over the fire. It gives off an earthy scent, almost sweet. You realize fashion was born from that alchemy. Earth, labor, and imagination spun together into something that said, I exist, I matter. A cat winds around your legs, brushing your scratchy hem. You look down at your own reflection in the river. The outfit's simple, functional, but it fits. Well, mostly. You smile. Maybe, in a world where fabric equals fortune, the best fashion statement is simply staying warm. You wander back toward the village square. People are waking, dressing, wrapping, lacing. The sounds of mourning, wood clattering, geese honking, fabric snapping on the breeze, blend into a strange symphony. You realize every rustle tells a story, every garment a compromise between pride and practicality. By nightfall, when the torches flicker again and the nobles ride past in their jewel-toned splendor, you'll see them differently, because beneath every velvet robe lies an underlayer of wool, and beneath every royal perfume, the scent of effort, sweat, and soap root. And when you scratch your scalp again, just out of habit, you'll laugh quietly to yourself, thinking, at least I don't need a candle comb. You wake up on a narrow cobblestone street, early morning fog curling around your ankles like a cat. Your boots, if you can call them that, are long, pointed, and entirely impractical. You take one cautious step and nearly trip. Congratulations. You've just joined the medieval elite in the age of Poulain. Those absurdly long, dagger-toed shoes that turned walking into a full-body performance. A rooster crows somewhere, and a baker leans against his doorway, laughing as you wobble past. Careful, my lord, he calls. The street's not made for peacocks. You glance down again. Each shoe stretches a full foot beyond your toes, curling slightly upward, laced with a strip of colored leather. A gentle reminder that medieval fashion didn't care about ergonomics. It cared about symbolism. Here's your mainstream fact of the evening. Those pointed shoes appeared in Europe around the 14th century, most famously in places like Krakow and London. They were called Krakows after the Polish city that supposedly inspired them. The longer your shoe tip, the higher your social standing. A knight might wear a modest 6-inch point, but a nobleman could flaunt 12 inches or more, secured with a little chain to keep it from flapping, because nothing says power like being one trip away from face planting in the mud. Historians still argue whether the poulain craze began as an expression of wealth or as a joke that got out of hand. Some think it was a statement of idleness. Look, I'm so important, I don't even need to walk properly. Others believe it reflected romantic ideals, with the elongated shape mimicking the elegant lines of Gothic art. Either way, you're stuck trying to maneuver through a street full of equally clumsy trendsetters. A man selling apples gestures toward your feet. Careful near the pigs, he warns. They like to chew the ends. You pull your shoes closer. Apparently, leather toe tips were prime pig snacks. One more medieval hazard they don't mention in history class. You turn a corner and almost collide with a group of apprentices laughing over their shorter, stubby boots. Not noble enough for stilts, one jokes, winking. Their footwear, though humble, actually lets them walk. You feel a flash of envy. It's the eternal curse of fashion. The more stylish, the less practical. A noble woman passes by in a gown so long it sweeps the ground, her pointed shoes peeking out like secret weapons. She glides more than walks, balancing grace and danger. You imagine the daily struggle of getting upstairs or into a carriage without catching a toe. A quirky tidbit. Some pairs were so long that men tied the tips to their knees with silk cords. Medieval life, the birthplace of the world's first shoe garter. You stumble again, nearly crashing into a fishmonger's stall. The smell hits you. Salt, scales, and yesterday's catch. The fishmonger chuckles. Another fashion pilgrim, he says. You folks keep my business lively. All that falling over, and someone's bound to end up buying ointment for bruises. Despite your humiliation, you notice something striking. Everyone's watching. Even commoners pause their work to gawk at these ridiculous shoes. That's the secret. They're meant to be seen. In a world without social media, fashion was your feed, your profile picture, your announcement of relevance. Those elongated toes, those sculpted silhouettes. They told a story before you opened your mouth. The cobblestones give way to the smooth floor of a guild hall. Inside, a meeting is in progress. Shoemakers, merchants, and tailors are arguing loudly about leather shortages. The guild master slams his fist on the table. Too much waste on vanity points, he roars. You can't help but grin. Even in the 1300s, people were complaining about influencers ruining the market. The guildmaster lifts one of the absurd shoes for everyone to see. We used to make boots that lasted 5 winters, he says. Now people want towboats. The apprentices snicker. You realize you're standing in the birthplace of consumer culture. Fashion driving production, production feeding fashion. Everyone scrambling to keep up. A historian today might say this was one of the earliest examples of planned impracticality. The upper classes constantly shifted styles to stay ahead of imitation. When the peasants caught on, nobles exaggerated longer shoes, tighter hose, rarer dyes. It was a visual arms race where each new trend made the previous one look obsolete. You step outside again, relieved to breathe. But then you notice something darker. At the end of the street, a group of preachers shouts about vanity and sin. One waves a worn parchment condemning the devilish fashion of pointed shoes. According to them, the exaggerated points symbolized pride and lust, temptations that led good Christians astray. Some even claimed the design imitated the claws of demons. You look down at your own toes and can't help muttering, well, that escalated quickly. Historians still argue whether the church's protests actually changed trends or merely fueled them. Human nature being what it is, you suspect the latter. Nothing sells faster than forbidden style. Later, as dusk settles, you wander into a tavern. The floor is sticky, the air thick with ale and laughter. Patrons kick off their poulains, massaging sore feet. A minstrel sings a bawdy song about a knight who tripped on his own shoes during a duel. The punchline? His opponent was too busy laughing to deliver the killing blow. Even here, fashion and farce walk hand in hand. A merchant beside you raises his mug. At least they make good conversation, he says. You clink cups, though yours sloshes halfway onto your lap. The man continues. They say King Charles banned them last year. Too scandalous, too foreign. You raise an eyebrow. And yet, you're wearing them. He grins. Of course. The king can keep his short toes. I'll keep my style. That's the strange magic of medieval fashion. It thrived on contradiction. The same society that preached humility worshipped extravagance. Even bands only made trends more desirable. You stretch your aching feet under the table, feeling the tension between elegance and absurdity. The night deepens. The fire crackles. Someone jokes about inventing shoes you can actually run in. An idea met with laughter, because who in their right mind would run? You smile, thinking of how those long, curling toes will one day inspire Renaissance slippers, then Victorian boots, then modern stilettos. Every ridiculous step leaves a mark. When you finally stumble outside again, moonlight glinting on the wet cobbles, you notice your reflection in a puddle. The points of your shoes look like arrows leading forward, absurd and proud. Maybe, you think, that's the essence of medieval fashion. It always pointed toward something unreachable. You take one last, careful step. The fog swirls. The bells toll somewhere far away. And you walk on, knowing that in this world, even falling flat on your face could be considered on trend. You're walking now through a narrow alley that smells faintly of dye, sweet, chemical, and metallic all at once. Wooden barrels line both sides, each filled with strange colors swirling under the torchlight. Deep indigos, bruised purples, muddy yellows, and one unsettling shade of green that looks vaguely poisonous. Welcome to the color wars, the medieval fashion battlefield, where hue equaled hierarchy. The dyers barely glance up from their work. One stirs a vat with a long wooden pole, splashes, staining his hands blue to the wrists. Another wrings out dripping wool, the water running down the cobbles like a tiny rainbow gone wrong. You edge closer and catch sight of a noble's cloak hanging on a rack, shimmering wetly in the light. That particular shade, imperial purple, is so rich it looks like it could stain your soul. Here's a solid fact. Color literally cost power in the Middle Ages. Purple, for instance, was linked to Roman emperors and later European royalty because its source, the murex sea snail, was absurdly rare. It took thousands of crushed snails to dye a single garment. By the 14th century, Purple was so expensive that even kings limited who could wear it. Meanwhile, bright blues made from lapis lazuli or indigo were almost as prized. Historians still argue whether these pigments were valued more for their rarity or their symbolism of divine favor, but either way, they turned clothing into a social code. A dyer waves you over. Mind your step, he warns, pointing at the vats. One drop, and you'll be blue for a week. He chuckles, but you notice the stains on his own skin. His hands are a mosaic of effort, every color telling a story. You realize the true artisans of fashion weren't the nobles flaunting silk. They were the unseen laborers who lived half-dyed themselves. He hands you a length of damp cloth, once white, now a soft gold. Saffron, he says proudly, worth more than meat. You inhale. It smells faintly floral, faintly dusty. Yellow for faith, he adds, almost reverently. Colors weren't just decoration. They carried moral weight. Green for fertility, blue for purity, red for passion or war, black for authority and mourning. In a world obsessed with meaning, your wardrobe was your philosophy. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some medieval painters used the same dyes for both fabric and manuscripts. Your cloak could share a pigment with an illuminated Bible. Imagine wearing the same blue as the Virgin Mary S robe in a church window. That S spiritual synergy, or possibly blasphemy, depending on who you asked. You follow the dyer outside to a yard where sheets of cloth hang like flags in a dream. The wind flaps them around you until you're half lost in a maze of color. It's mesmerizing. The play of light on pigment, the faint hiss of dripping water. You can't help but laugh softly. It's like walking through a mood ring, you say, though of course no one understands the reference. He nods anyway. Colors speak, he replies, but they lie too. He tells you that merchants often diluted expensive dyes to stretch profit, selling royal crimson that faded to pink in the sun. Buyers had to know their shades. True wealth wasn't just wearing color, but knowing authenticity. Historians still debate whether medieval people perceived color differently than we do. Some argue that dye's chemical instability gave fabrics a shimmering, living quality that modern pigments can't replicate. Others think it's nostalgia, coloring our view, literally. But as you stand surrounded by drying cloth, the idea that color was alive feels true. The fabrics shift tone with every flicker of light, as if breathing. Down the lane, a group of apprentices carry baskets of woad leaves, the plant behind Europe's signature blue. They smell faintly rotten. The process of making woad dye involves fermentation, which, in less poetic terms, means rotting it in vats of human urine. You step back quickly as one apprentice sloshes a bit onto the ground. The smell could knock out a dragon. Beauty's pain, one of them jokes, waving his stained hands. You can't help laughing, then coughing. Later, you reach the market square where merchants display bolts of cloth like treasure. Peasants touch them wistfully, eyes wide. A merchant shouts, "French scarlet, true Venetian blue," though both claims are probably lies. The crowd surges anyway. Everyone wants color, even if only a ribbon's worth. Because in this world, gray means invisibility. A young tailor nearby examines a piece of fabric in the fading light. He runs his fingers across the weave, nodding. "Not real indigo," he murmurs, "but close enough." You realize that most people couldn't afford the genuine dyes, so they faked it. using onion skins, madder roots, or even rust to mimic the rich hues of nobility. It's the medieval equivalent of buying a knockoff designer bag, and yet, in those handmade shades, there's an honesty of effort that the richest silks could never match. As dusk falls, torches flicker to life. The fabrics glow like stained glass. You wander through the square, each step revealing a new color story. A monk passes, his robe the soft brown of unbleached wool, deliberately dull. A lady sweeps by in crimson, her perfume clashing with the smell of woad. Two children chase each other, their patched tunics glowing with uneven splashes of green and blue. Accidental beauty. You pause beside a stall, selling dyed ribbons. The vendor grins. For luck, he offers. You pick one, deep blue, the color of twilight, and tie it around your wrist. It feels cool, almost sacred. There's something addictive about this world of hues, a sense that every color choice is both armor and announcement. Even now, centuries later, we still say someone's green with envy or feeling blue. Maybe that's the true medieval legacy. Emotions, ranked and tinted. A sudden shout breaks your reverie. Across the square, two men argue, one accusing the other of stealing dye secrets. You catch fragments of their insults. You watered it down. You cheated the guild. The fight ends when one man throws a handful of woad sludge at the other, staining his face bright blue. The crowd roars with laughter. Medieval justice, messy, immediate, and colorful. You can't stop smiling. You look down at your ribbon again, the blue darkening as it dries. Maybe it's true. Colors lie. But sometimes, lies are what make the world beautiful. As you walk away, night deepens, swallowing the hues one by one until only the faint glow of purple and red remains, whispering in the dark. Tomorrow, those colors will fade a little more, but for now, they burn with the last pride of their creation, defiant, alive, and gloriously bizarre. You blink awake beneath the shadow of a carved wooden screen, faint candlelight flickering across velvet cushions and the unmistakable sound of laces tightening. Slow, deliberate, almost musical. The air smells of rose oil and faintly of something metallic, like polished armor. You're in a noble woman's chamber now, and she's preparing for the evening's feast, though her struggle looks less like dressing and more like combat. Welcome to the realm of corsets, codpieces, and confidence, where fashion literally reshaped bodies to fit ideals that no one could naturally maintain. A maid tugs the woman's corset strings with all her might, muttering under her breath. The lady exhales, then inhales again, ribs protesting with a creak that might as well be a cry for mercy. Tighter, she gasps, smiling through the pain. You wince. Yes, not wearing the Victorian-style cage you were thinking of. This is the early version, stiffened with reeds, whalebone, or horn, meant to flatten rather than sculpt. Still, it does the trick. Her torso becomes an elegant column, her movements deliberate and slow, as if grace were something learned through restriction. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, fitted garments became a fashion revolution. Earlier, tunics and gowns hung loose, but the 14th and 15th centuries introduced tailoring, giving rise to the corset, or pair of bodies. It symbolized discipline, virtue, and social refinement. Historians still argue whether it was empowerment or imprisonment, a statement of control or submission. What's certain is that medieval women, noble or not, wore structure as self-expression Long before shapewear became a modern obsession, across the room, her husband prepares as well, though his ritual looks suspiciously easier. He's fastening his doublet, stuffing the front with a bold little pouch that draws your attention whether you like it or not. The codpiece. You nearly choke on your own breath. It's padded, stitched in velvet, and alarmingly proud of itself. A quirky tidbit, codpieces started as simple flaps to cover the gap between a man's hose when fashion dictated short tunics. But by the 15th century, they'd evolved into exaggerated statements of masculinity, sometimes even used as tiny pockets for coins or letters. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a sports car, overcompensating and impossible to ignore. You try not to stare, but it's like trying not to look at a traffic accident made of fabric. The man catches your glance and smirks. It's all about confidence, he says, patting the padding. A man must look equipped. You nod politely, praying for the conversation to end. Fashion, you realize, was medieval psychology in textile form. Women were sculpted to project chastity and grace. Men inflated to show dominance and virility, and everyone played along, willingly. The lady adjusts her pearl choker, another little restraint disguised as beauty, while the gentleman checks his reflection in a polished silver mirror, turning to admire his profile like a rooster who's just discovered reflective surfaces. Historians still argue, you whisper to yourself, whether people actually found this attractive. The truth is complicated. Beauty ideals shift with culture, and what looked elegant in candlelight might seem absurd under LEDs. But for the medieval elite, fashion wasn't just about appeal. It was about performance. Each silhouette carried moral weight. A tightly bound waist meant virtue. A broad padded chest meant power. You're invited to accompany them to the hall, and you quickly agree, partly for the story, partly to escape the awkward air of mutual vanity. The corridor beyond is lined with tapestries showing knights and saints, every figure impossibly slender or heroic. It dawns on you that the art wasn't exaggerating, it was advertising. Fashion didn't just reflect aspiration, it created it. At the feast, the guests glitter. The women's gowns gleam like liquid metal, their corseted forms stiff as armor. The men's doublets are slashed to reveal contrasting fabrics beneath. A peak of luxury, deliberate and provocative. Everywhere you look, people fidget subtly, pulling, adjusting, pretending comfort. You realize medieval gatherings must have sounded like a chorus of creaks, rustles, and sighs of relief. A servant spills wine, and a crimson splash blooms across one lady's bodice. She gasps, horrified, not at the mess, but at the symbolism. Red, once a sign of passion or danger, could also mean sin. "Fetch salt," she cries, dabbing frantically. The other women murmur sympathetic curses. The men, of course, just laugh. Some trends never die. A minstrel strums a lute and begins a cheeky ballad about a tailor who stitched a corset so tight the wearer fainted mid-serenade. The crowd roars with laughter. You smirk. Comedy has always loved fashion victims. At the far end of the table, you spot a scholar arguing with a cleric about vanity. God made the body perfect, the cleric insists. These contraptions mock his design. The scholar retorts, but they show discipline, control of the flesh. Their debate spirals into theology of tailoring. You sip your watered wine and think, historians would love this transcript. Later, when the feast dwindles, and torches burn low, you follow the noble couple back to their chambers. The lady leans against a pillar, finally unlacing her corset with a relieved groan. Freedom, she whispers, rubbing at red marks on her ribs. Her husband sets aside his codpiece with equal relief. You notice he walks easier without it. They laugh together, genuine laughter, soft and tired. In that moment, you glimpse the humanity behind the absurdity. These weren't people blindly enslaved by vanity. They were players in a shared illusion, doing their best to shine within the limits of their world. You think about how little has changed. Our waist trainers, padded suits, contour kits, they're all distant echoes of these same longings to appear better, braver, more beautiful than we feel. Maybe that's the strangest part of medieval fashion. It's not alien at all. It's uncomfortably familiar. The firelight dims. The corset lies draped over a chair, like a conquered dragon, and the codpiece sits beside it, suddenly small and silly. You smile, whispering, every era has its armor. Outside, the night wind sighs through the window, fluttering the curtain like a gown exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. You blink awake beneath the shadow of a carved wooden screen, faint candlelight flickering across velvet cushions and the unmistakable sound of laces tightening. Slow, deliberate, almost musical. The air smells of rose oil and faintly of something metallic, like polished armor. You're in a noble woman's chamber now, and she's preparing for the evening's feast, though her struggle looks less like dressing and more like combat. Welcome to the realm of corsets, codpieces, and confidence, where fashion literally reshaped bodies to fit ideals that no one could naturally maintain. A maid tugs the woman's corset strings with all her might, muttering under her breath. The lady exhales, then inhales again, ribs protesting with a creak that might as well be a cry for mercy. Tighter, she gasps, smiling through the pain. You wince. She is not wearing the Victorian-style cage you were thinking of. This is the early version, stiffened with reeds, whalebone, or horn, meant to flatten rather than sculpt. Still, it does the trick. Her torso becomes an elegant column, her movements deliberate and slow, as if grace were something learned through restriction. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, fitted garments became a fashion revolution. Earlier, tunics and gowns hung loose, but the 14th and 15th centuries introduced tailoring, giving rise to the corset, or pair of bodies. It symbolized discipline, virtue, and social refinement. Historians still argue whether it was empowerment or imprisonment, a statement of control or submission. What's certain is that medieval women, noble or not, wore structure as self-expression long before shapewear became a modern obsession. Across the room, her husband prepares as well, though his ritual looks suspiciously easier. He's fastening his doublet, stuffing the front with a bold little pouch that draws your attention whether you like it or not. The codpiece. You nearly choke on your own breath. It's padded, stitched in velvet, and alarmingly proud of itself. A quirky tidbit, codpieces started as simple flaps to cover the gap between a man's hose when fashion dictated short tunics. But by the 15th century, they'd evolved into exaggerated statements of masculinity, sometimes even used as tiny pockets for coins or letters. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a sports car, overcompensating and impossible to ignore. You try not to stare, but it's like trying not to look at a traffic accident made of fabric. The man catches your glance and smirks. It's all about confidence, he says, patting the padding. A man must look equipped. You nod politely, praying for the conversation to end. Fashion, you realize, was medieval psychology in textile form. Women were sculpted to project chastity and grace. Men inflated to show dominance and virility, and everyone played along, willingly. The lady adjusts her pearl choker, another little restraint disguised as beauty, while the gentleman checks his reflection in a polished silver mirror, turning to admire his profile like a rooster who's just discovered reflective surfaces. Historians still argue, you whisper to yourself, whether people actually found this attractive. The truth is complicated. Beauty ideals shift with culture, and what looked elegant in candlelight might seem absurd under LEDs. But for the medieval elite, fashion wasn't just about appeal, it was about performance. Each silhouette carried moral weight. A tightly bound waist meant virtue. A broad, padded chest meant power. You're invited to accompany them to the hall, and you quickly agree, partly for the story, partly to escape the awkward air of mutual vanity. The corridor beyond is lined with tapestries showing knights and saints, every figure impossibly slender or heroic. It dawns on you that the art wasn't exaggerating, it was advertising. Fashion didn't just reflect aspiration, it created it. At the feast, the guests glitter. The women's gowns gleam like liquid metal, their corseted forms stiff as armor. The men's doublets are slashed to reveal contrasting fabrics beneath. A peak of luxury, deliberate and provocative. Everywhere you look, people fidget subtly, pulling, adjusting, pretending comfort. You realize medieval gatherings must have sounded like a chorus of creaks, rustles, and sighs of relief. A servant spills wine, and a crimson splash blooms across one lady's bodice. She gasps, horrified, not at the mess, but at the symbolism. Red, once a sign of passion or danger, could also mean sin. "Fetch salt," she cries, dabbing frantically. The other women murmur sympathetic curses. The men, of course, just laugh. Some trends never die. A minstrel strums a lute and begins a cheeky ballad about a tailor who stitched a corset so tight the wearer fainted mid-serenade. The crowd roars with laughter. You smirk. Comedy has always loved fashion victims. At the far end of the table, you spot a scholar arguing with a cleric about vanity. God made the body perfect, the cleric insists. These contraptions mock his design. The scholar retorts, but they show discipline, control of the flesh. Their debate spirals into theology of tailoring. You sip your watered wine and think, historians would love this transcript. Later, when the feast dwindles and torches burn low, you follow the noble couple back to their chambers. The lady leans against a pillar, finally unlacing her corset with a relieved groan. "Freedom," she whispers, rubbing at red marks on her ribs. Her husband sets aside his codpiece with equal relief. You notice he walks easier without it. They laugh together, genuine laughter, soft and tired. In that moment, you glimpse the humanity behind the absurdity. These weren't people blindly enslaved by vanity. They were players in a shared illusion, doing their best to shine within the limits of their world. You think about how little has changed. Our waist trainers, padded suits, contour kits, they're all distant echoes of these same longings to appear better, braver, more beautiful than we feel. Maybe that's the strangest part of medieval fashion. It's not alien at all. It's uncomfortably familiar. The firelight dims. The corset lies draped over a chair, like a conquered dragon, and the codpiece sits beside it, suddenly small and silly. You smile, whispering, "Every era has its armor." Outside, the night wind sighs through the window, fluttering the curtain like a gown exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. The next morning, you're trudging through the cobbled streets of a medieval town again, but this time, something feels different. The air hums with gossip. Everyone's glancing over their shoulders, lowering voices, clutching cloaks tighter. You soon find out why. A town herald nails a parchment to the church door, reading aloud as the crowd gathers. Hear ye, by decree of His Majesty, citizens are henceforth forbidden to wear silk, fur, or gold thread garments unless of noble birth. Violators shall be fined or, heaven forbid, jailed. You can almost hear a collective groan. Someone mutters, "Another one? Didn't we just have a hat law last week?" Welcome to the age of sumptuary laws. The medieval government's attempt to control who looked fancy and how fancy they were allowed to look. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Sumptuary laws spread through Europe from the 13th to 16th centuries, with monarchs like Edward III of England and the Italian city-states passing detailed dress codes. They were meant to preserve class order. Only nobles could flaunt certain fabrics or colors, while commoners were told to keep it humble. Historians still argue whether these laws truly reflected moral concern or were simply economic strategies to keep wealth circulating in elite circles. You scan the crowd, tailors, merchants, even a few irritated housewives all murmuring. A merchant complains that his wife can't wear velvet anymore. "She is velvet," he insists, slapping his thigh in frustration. His wife scowls. "They can't stop me from looking good," she says, clearly planning to disobey. A quirky tidbit. One law in 14th century Florence prohibited women from wearing dresses with trains longer than 2.5 yards. The logic? Excess fabric symbolized sinful pride, and, more practically, kept streets cleaner. But Florentine women found a loophole. They wore detachable trains indoors for display, then unbuttoned them outside. You can almost hear the collective medieval, "Ha, gotcha," echoing through time. As you wander away from the crowd, you notice how rebellion brews quietly in fabric choices. A baker's wife wears rough wool, but there's a small patch of bright blue embroidery at her collar. Illegal, but subtle. A young tailor sells doublets with hidden silk linings. A blacksmith, of all people, sports a crimson feather tucked into his hatband. The law may forbid appearance, but it can't govern taste. You stop by a tavern where a lively debate unfolds. A bearded man slams his mug down. "They say gold thread belongs to dukes, but I made this coin myself at the forge. Why shouldn't I wear it?" A scholar across from him replies, "Because the illusion of hierarchy is all that keeps us from chaos." The blacksmith grins. Then maybe chaos just needs a better tailor. You sip your ale, half amused, half thoughtful. The room is full of quiet acts of defiance. Patched velvet sleeves, dyed stockings, silver brooches, small, shining rebellions stitched into everyday life. Historians still argue whether people genuinely feared punishment or if these laws were mostly symbolic, a kind of moral theater for monarchs to remind everyone of their place. You watch as the tavern keeper pours another round, her apron spotless white. "They can't find me for being clean," she says with a wink. You raise your mug in silent toast. Stepping outside, You notice a procession of nobles gliding past, their garments shimmering like sunlight on water. One woman's gown trails behind her so far it needs two attendants just to keep it off the ground. Commoners stop and stare, not always with admiration. The envy is sharp, the resentment sharper. The divide is visible, tangible, textile. A boy beside you whispers, "My mum says the rich wear sin." You turn to answer, but he's already run off, chasing a dog, wearing a tiny scrap of lace around its neck. Even pets are flaunting forbidden fabrics now. That night, in a dim corner of the town square, you spot a group of women huddled together, sewing by lantern light. They're laughing, whispering, passing fabrics like contraband. "This one's Italian silk," says one proudly, "traded for honey and 2 hams." Another snorts, "Worth it." They tuck their creations away, ready for secret unveiling at Sunday Mass, where vanity meets piety under God's indifferent gaze. A sudden gust extinguishes a lantern, and for a heartbeat, the scene goes dark, then flares back to life as someone relights it. It is a perfect metaphor for the era. No matter how many laws tried to snuff out luxury, desire rekindled itself endlessly. You stroll toward the castle, curiosity piqued. Inside, a royal council is underway, and you eavesdrop from behind a pillar. Courtiers argue over colors. Literally, only princes may wear purple, one declares, and bishops, another adds. The king waves a hand dismissively. "As long as no farmer shows up in crimson, I don't care." You can't help smirking. Even rulers admit the absurdity, yet cling to it like security blankets woven from control. After all, fashion isn't just fabric, it's identity, rank, permission. Without it, how could anyone tell who mattered? Later, as the moon rises, you find yourself in the outskirts again, near a small cottage. Through the window, a girl sits at a spinning wheel, humming softly. Her dress is plain wool, but around her wrist glimmers a single golden thread. She winds it carefully into her weaving, a secret rebellion. Her mother calls it dangerous. She calls it beautiful. You watch as the finished fabric unfurls under her hands, gray with subtle gold shimmer, humble yet radiant. It's proof that even under law, creativity finds loopholes. And suddenly, the deeper irony strikes you. The medieval obsession with hierarchy birthed not obedience, but innovation. When forbidden to wear gold, people learned to imitate it with brass thread. When silk was banned, they mixed flax with wool until it shimmered almost the same. Entire industries of clever substitution bloomed, necessity's stylish offspring. You lean against the doorframe, listening to the rhythmic creak of the spinning wheel. The golden thread catches candlelight like a whispered promise. Laws can dictate outward appearances, but they can't legislate the soul's hunger for beauty. Before you leave, you whisper softly, "They can't find imagination." The girl glances up, as if she somehow heard, and smiles. You fade back into the night, your cloak brushing dew-damp grass, feeling the steady pulse of rebellion stitched into every fiber of medieval life. You drift into the next day on a gust of perfumed air, literally perfumed, because the streets are lined with spice sellers and dyers, each with their own heady scents. It's overwhelming. Cinnamon, vinegar, rose oil, fish brine, and something that smells suspiciously like wet socks, but turns out to be indigo dye. The medieval world didn't just wear color, it chased it, worshipped it, and sometimes destroyed things in pursuit of it. You wander through a dyer's quarter, by the river, where vats bubble like witches' cauldrons, and apprentices stir with long poles, splashing droplets of brilliant blue and green. Careful, one shouts, waving you back. You'll stain those boots till Judgment Day. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The most coveted medieval colors, like royal blue, Tyrian purple, and crimson, came from rare, expensive sources. True purple, for instance, was made from crushed murex sea snails, requiring thousands of shells for a single ounce of dye. Crimson came from the Kermes insect, scraped from Mediterranean oaks, while bright blue often came from lapis lazuli, ground into pigment. Historians still argue whether Europe's color mania reflected spiritual symbolism or raw status obsession, but likely it was both. You peer into a vat of simmering liquid, color of midnight. The dyer explains that it's woad, a local plant used to make blue before indigo arrived from Asia. The smell makes your eyes water. Beauty takes sacrifice, he says with a grin, gesturing to his permanently blue-stained hands. You realize this man could never hide his profession. His fingers are his resume. A merchant woman bursts in, waving a scrap of cloth. Too dull, she complains. My husband won't stand out at court. The dyer sighs. Then tell him to marry the sun. She doesn't laugh. You do. You pass a row of drying fabrics, gold, scarlet, green, and the effect is dazzling, like a medieval rainbow pinned to a clothesline. But behind the beauty, there's labor. You watch as workers stir, rinse, wring, and dry, their hands raw, their lungs full of fumes. A young apprentice coughs, wiping sweat from his brow. You hand him a piece of bread, and he grins. Thanks. It's the woad, sir. Gets in your throat, makes you dream blue. A quirky tidbit. Medieval dyers used all kinds of strange ingredients to set colors. Urine, alum, vinegar, even stale beer. Some towns had designated pea collectors who went door to door with buckets. You picture that profession on a resume and nearly choke laughing. Historians still argue whether workers in these industries faced widespread illness from the chemicals they used or simply adapted over time. Records are vague, but the smell alone could knock you flat. You catch a whiff of ammonia and gag slightly. A woman nearby chuckles. That's the price of fashion. Better than death by corset, eh? You grin weakly and nod. The river beside the dye shops runs streaked with every color imaginable. Blue pools near one bend, red near another, green where someone dumped excess pigment. It's both beautiful and grotesque, a medieval tie-dye accident turned landscape art. Children splash in the shallows, their skin tinted faintly blue. One boy waves at you, teeth flashing white against a cobalt face. I'm a knight, he declares. You bow dramatically. Sir Bluebeard the Brave. Further along the riverbank, you find a more refined establishment, a workshop where monks dye silk for church vestments. Inside, the silence feels sacred. One monk carefully lowers a bolt of cloth into crimson dye, murmuring a prayer. Color, he whispers, is the soul made visible. You stand still, awed. The monk explains that certain hues carried deep symbolism. White for purity, red for martyrdom, blue for the Virgin Mary's divine grace. To wear blue, he says softly, was to echo heaven. You glance at the drying silk. It gleams like sunset, filtered through wine. For a moment, you understand. Color wasn't just fashion. It was theology woven into thread. Outside again, the world seems brighter, almost excessive. Even peasants wear dyed caps or patched skirts in muted tones. You pass a farmer wearing a faded green tunic that once might have been emerald. He shrugs when you compliment it. Was blue when I bought it, he says. Sweat changes everything. Later, in the market square, a peddler sells tiny vials of pigment, claiming they come from the east. For painting lips and cheeks, he announces. For your beloved's admiration. A burly man buys one, winks, and says, For my pig, she deserves glamour. The crowd roars with laughter. As dusk falls, the colors around you deepen. The crimson banners of the town's guild hall ripple in the wind. Torches light them like blood and flame. You cannot help noticing how medieval people saturated their darkness with color, an antidote to the grayness of mud and poverty. It was defiance in hue, but not everyone approved. A priest thunders from a pulpit nearby. Vanity paints the devil, his face upon your garments. His sermon echoes through the square. A young couple in matching scarlet cloaks smirk, holding hands tighter. They walk away, glowing in the torchlight, two living sparks. That night, you wander to the Dyer's River once more. The moon glows silver, reflecting off streaks of indigo and vermilion. The air hums with crickets and distant hammering from a blacksmith's forge. You crouch, dipping a finger into the water. It stains your skin faintly purple. You rub it, but it won't come off. For a strange moment, you feel connected to every artisan, every monk, every vanity-driven noble, whoever stained their hands chasing beauty. Historians may still debate whether color was sacred or scandalous, but standing here, you understand it was both, because in a world that could be cold, dirty, and short, color was a rebellion. It said, I am alive. You dry your hand on your cloak, leaving a faint violet streak. The night wind picks up, fluttering banners above you, and you imagine the colors whispering their own names to the stars. Somewhere downriver, a dyer's apprentice is still stirring a vat by moonlight, humming a tune. The surface ripples, then settles, catching the stars like spilled pigment. You exhale slowly, whispering, even mud dreams in color. The next scene unfolds in the hush of a small chamber, lit by one flickering candle and filled with the faint scent of lavender and something sweetly sour, rosewater mixed with vinegar, the medieval answer to perfume. You are standing beside a low table where an array of mysterious pots, vials, and brushes are scattered. In the mirror, a polished sheet of bronze, you see a woman's face, half covered in a chalky white paste. She looks like a ghost, preparing for a masquerade. Welcome to the world of medieval beauty secrets, where vanity met alchemy and personal care occasionally doubled as mild poisoning. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Middle Ages, pale skin was the ultimate symbol of beauty and class. It meant you didn't labor outdoors, and therefore weren't a peasant. To achieve it, people used powders made of white lead, vinegar, and even ground alabaster. Historians still argue whether the craze came directly from ancient Roman influence or developed anew under medieval ideals of spiritual purity. But either way, the fashion for pallor was powerful enough to override good sense. The lady dips her brush into the pale paste and smooths it across her cheeks. Milk of Venus, she says proudly. You take one cautious sniff. Definitely not milk. Doesn't it burn? You ask. She shrugs. A little. Beauty demands fortitude. On the table sits another bottle labeled Aqua Mirabilis. You raise an eyebrow. Miraculous water, she grins, distilled from herbs and wine. Keeps wrinkles away. You watch her dab it onto her temples and wonder if the faint grimace means the miracle's still in testing. A servant enters, carrying a bowl of herbs steeped in warm water. The scent of rosemary fills the room. For the hair, the lady explains. Strength and shine. The servant combs the mixture through her long braids, careful not to pull. Some use vinegar instead, she adds, or even lie, if they're desperate. You swallow hard, mentally noting not to try medieval shampoo anytime soon. Then she opens a small wooden box and reveals its treasures. Beeswax lip balm, tinted with crushed berries, a piece of pumice for smoothing the skin, and a clump of burned cork used to darken eyebrows. The secret, she whispers, is balance. Pale skin, dark brows, red lips. The holy trinity of allure. You catch your reflection beside hers and nearly laugh. Under candlelight, your modern face looks oddly plain, almost too alive, compared to her powdered perfection. A quirky tidbit, one 14th century beauty manual advised women to bathe in donkey milk and rub their teeth with sage ashes for radiant smiles. Another suggested swallowing crushed pearls to improve complexion. Historians still argue, you murmur, whether anyone survived that long enough to see results. You follow the lady to her wardrobe, where she chooses a delicate veil embroidered with tiny gold stars. Modesty, she says softly, pinning it beneath her chin. Men mustn't see everything, just enough to wonder. The irony isn't lost on you. The veil conceals her face, yet somehow makes her more noticeable. Fashion, then as now, loves its contradictions. Outside, the sun has set, and the streets fill with echoes of laughter and lute strings. You wander through a row of apothecaries, each advertising miracles in glass bottles. One claims his tonic restores maidenly bloom. Another swears by a paste that banishes freckles forever. You peek into a shop where a bearded alchemist mixes herbs over a flame, muttering in Latin. His assistant grinds something red into powder. Cinnabar, he explains. Mercury sulfide, for rouge. You recoil slightly. Mercury? He nods cheerfully. Just don't lick your lips too often. Historians still argue whether people truly believed in the medical safety of these cosmetics or simply accepted risk as part of glamour. Either way, poison and perfume became uneasy bedfellows. You slip into a nearby bathhouse for cleaner air. Inside, the steam is fragrant with mint and rose petals. Women sit chatting, scrubbing, gossiping. Did you hear? One says. Lady Beatrix lost her hair from too much lye rinse. Another laughs. Serves her right. She was hoarding saffron again. They cluck like pigeons, content in their shared rituals of self-care and rivalry. You notice how communal the act of beauty is here. It's not just vanity. It's social currency, storytelling, competition. Every stain of rouge, every perfume choice carries meaning. One woman's perfume, sharp with musk, announces her confidence. Another's faint lavender whisper hints at piety. You realize medieval people wore scent like language. Later, back on the street, you pass a young monk preaching modesty to a crowd of women, buying rouge. Paint deceives, he cries. God made your faces as they are. One woman folds her arms. Then he should have added more color, she retorts. The crowd bursts out laughing, and even the monk blushes. You grin. Apparently, sass is timeless. As the night deepens, you wander toward the castle courtyard. where torches throw golden halos over passing figures, courtiers drift by, faces powdered, lips stained, hands fragrant. The air feels heavy with effort, the collective sigh of people maintaining perfection. You watch one nobleman adjust his perfumed beard oil and wonder how much of this beauty obsession was genuine and how much was armor. The face paint hides not only blemishes but anxiety, social tension, fear of fading favor, its makeup as self-defense. You think of modern filters and lighting tricks and realize different tools, same hunger. A soft breeze brushes your face, carrying hints of rosemary and rose. Somewhere, a lute plays a slow melody. You picture the lady from earlier, now at a feast, her lead white cheeks glowing under candlelight, her smile poised, her lips like red secrets. Tomorrow, she'll wash it all away, perhaps with milk or vinegar, and start again. You step to a fountain and dip your fingers into the water. Reflections waver. Your face, her face, all faces, through time repeating the same ritual, preparing to be seen. The candlelight of history flickers behind it all. Patient, forgiving, amused. Beauty, you whisper to the rippling surface, was always just another form of storytelling. The water shimmers, briefly turning silver, as if agreeing. You turn to leave, the scent of herbs still clinging to your sleeves, and somewhere behind you, laughter spills out of a window. Soft, tired, human. You smile into the night. You wake to the clatter of hooves and the dull rhythmic clunk of metal striking stone. The morning sun glints off armor, rows of polished plates that catch the light like mirrors. You're in a medieval tournament ground, banners snapping overhead, the air thick with dust and pride. But amid all the steel and the swagger, your eyes catch something unexpected. Fashion, not the kind you'd expect from warriors either. These knights look fabulous. Their armor gleams with gold filigree. Their surcoats shimmer in heraldic colors. Scarlet lions, silver crosses, green dragons curling across silk. Plumes wave from helmets, long and curved like exotic birds. Even the horses wear embroidered caparisons that sweep the ground, each one a masterpiece of stitching and status. You realize, with a half laugh, that chivalry and couture were never so far apart. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the High and Late Middle Ages, armor wasn't just protection, it was performance. Knights and nobles spent fortunes customizing their gear with engraving, gilding, and crests. Tournaments became fashion runways for masculinity, where power was measured as much by polish as by prowess. Historians still argue whether these displays were sincere martial pageantry or thinly disguised aristocratic vanity, but either way, the result was dazzling. A herald blows a trumpet, and two knights ride forward. Their armor shines so brightly, it's hard to look straight at them. Sir Guillaume the Gallant, shouts the announcer, and Sir Henri of the Crimson Field. The crowd roars. You glance at Sir Henri's ensemble. Yes, ensemble is the right word. His entire suit is tinted faintly red, from his surcoat to the etched dragons on his breastplate. He even has a matching feather plume curling from his visor like a question mark of ego. You turn to a nearby squire. Did they really dye armor? The boy nods. Tempered with heat, my lord. Costs a year's wages. He'll scratch it by sundown. Sir Guillaume rides forward next, his armor silver, his cloak deep blue, a sunburst emblem across his chest. You notice delicate etching around the edges, tiny fleur-de-lis glinting like jewelry. His horse's hooves are wrapped in gold-painted leather. It's like watching an armored peacock show off at a joust. The two men lower their lances, the crowd hushes, and the thunder of hooves begins. They collide in a flash of color and splinters, glorious, dangerous, and absurdly beautiful. Guillaume's blue plume sails through the air like a bird losing its will to fly. The crowd gasps, then cheers. Henri's visor pops open. His hair looks perfect. You can't help laughing softly. Medieval hairspray, you mutter. After the joust, squires rush to polish armor, replace ribbons, and reset the aesthetic perfection. You watch one man buffing a gauntlet with what looks suspiciously like wine. Makes the metal glow, he says. Also makes me smell fancy. A quirky tidbit. Some knights infused their armor, padding with herbs like lavender or mint to mask the stench of sweat during long tournaments. Others wore scented gloves or carried perfumed sachets sewn into their sleeves. Chivalry, apparently, had a nose for presentation. Historians still argue whether knights truly fought better because of their finery, or if all that embellishment was simply a rich man's game. What's clear is that armor was identity, a portable billboard of lineage and pride. Every emblem told a story. Every Polish stroke whispered, I belong among the shining. You wander toward the tents behind the lists. Inside, tailors and blacksmiths work side by side, one hammering steel, the other stitching silk. Armor and attire, says the tailor, threading a needle, are two halves of one truth. The outside must match the inside. You glance at his hands, calloused like a smith's, but stained with dye. Do you ever wish they'd just wear plain steel? He grins. Then who'd pay me? Outside again, a noblewoman watches the knights preen. Her gown is emerald green, trimmed with silver embroidery that mirrors her husband's armor motif. You notice how fashion bleeds between genders here. His steel echoes her silk. Her grace magnifies his bravado. Together, they're a matching set of medieval power dressing. Nearby, a troubadour sings a cheeky song about a knight who spent more time polishing his breastplate than fighting dragons. The crowd laughs, clapping in rhythm. You smile. Even back then, you whisper, people roasted influencers. Later, you wander to the armory tent, where broken lances lie scattered like the aftermath of a fashion show gone wrong. A young page holds up a dented helm. Ruined, he groans. Sir Guillaume will faint. The blacksmith chuckles. He can buy another. He's got more silver than sense. The page sighs, then adds softly, still, I'd wear it if I could. That longing in his voice hits you hard. The way class lines turned beauty into a privilege, armor included. For the rich, it was vanity. For the poor, aspiration. Evening settles. The tournament ends. Torches flicker across the camp, casting long shadows over piles of shining steel. You hear laughter from the noble's tent. Music, wine, pride unshaken. A few knights walk by, helmets under their arms, faces smeared with dust, but still glowing. You notice how small they seem without their armor. How human. One of them stops, smiling at you. Fine sport, eh? Hardly broke a sweat. You glance at the dent in his breastplate and the smear of blood on his cheek. You sure? He grins wider. Fashionable suffering, my friend. Then he walks on, plume bobbing like a rooster's tail. You stand for a moment, surrounded by the quiet aftermath. Metal cooling, silk rustling, the faint scent of oil and roses lingering in the night air. You think about how armor and attire have always shared one purpose: to protect, not just from weapons, but from judgment, from invisibility, from insignificance. The stars reflect in a puddle near your feet, where water has pooled around a discarded gauntlet. You crouch and pick it up. It's surprisingly light, engraved with a tiny sun. Inside, you find a scrap of ribbon, red and frayed, tied like a token. Maybe from a lover, maybe from a fan. Even warriors needed reminders that someone admired them. You set the gauntlet back down gently. The torchlight dances across its surface, and for an instant, you see your own reflection warped in the metal. Part knight, part onlooker, part dreamer. You smile softly. In the end, you murmur, everyone just wants to shine. The wind carries your words across the empty field, through the fluttering banners, where they mix with the faint echo of laughter and steel. The heartbeat of a world that turned war into theater, and theater into beauty. You wander away from the empty tournament field, following the sound of fabric whispering in the breeze. The smell of wool, dye, and freshly beaten flax thickens the air until you find yourself standing in the heart of a medieval marketplace. Stalls stretch in every direction, overflowing with bolts of cloth, crimson, indigo, ochre, and that impossible violet only the wealthy could afford. If the tournament was fashion stage, this place is its beating heart. A woman behind one table greets you with a grin that shows she's spent decades bartering with the best. Looking for color? She asks, holding up a piece of shimmering green silk. You nod automatically. Who wouldn't want to touch that? The fabric feels cool, almost alive. Italian, she says proudly. Dyed with weld and woad, finished in Florence. Fit for a king, or someone pretending to be one. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The trade in textiles was one of medieval Europe's biggest industries. From Flanders to Florence, whole cities grew rich spinning, weaving, and dyeing cloth for nobles and merchants alike. Fashion wasn't just personal, it was geopolitical. Whoever controlled dye routes or wool markets controlled prestige. Historians still argue whether color itself had more economic or symbolic power, but everyone agrees it shaped entire empires of style. You stroll between stalls, dazzled by colors that seem impossible for a pre-industrial world. The reds blaze like embers. The blues look deep enough to drown in. One dyer waves you closer, his hands permanently stained purple. Tyrian hue, he whispers, conspiratorially. Costs more than gold. You raise an eyebrow. From snails, right? He nods. Thousands of them. The smell's murder, but nobles love the result. You take a cautious sniff. He's not exaggerating. He points to a vat bubbling nearby, steam curling upward in violet tendrils. You can't rush color, he says. Takes time, patience, and the right recipe, and luck. You ask what he means by luck. He grins. Sometimes the dye just dies, turns brown, or green, or explodes. Happens. You decide to stand a respectful distance away. A quirky tidbit. Medieval dyers believed that the phase of the moon could influence the outcome of a batch. Some refused to dye under a waning moon, claiming it made colors dull. Others swore by secret prayers, whispered over the vats. You picture a full moon glowing over rows of cauldrons. Dye masters muttering incantations while boiling snail juice, and can't help thinking that modern color science has a much better PR team. You drift toward another stall. This one's selling linen, softest in France, the merchant insists, slapping the fabric with authority. Beats English wool any day. From the next table, a wool trader snorts. At least ours keeps you warm, fancy man. Within seconds, they're shouting about thread counts, sheep breeds, and shipping routes, as if you've stumbled into the world's earliest fashion influencer feud. Historians still argue whether these markets truly democratized fashion or just made nobles richer, but what's undeniable is how alive they felt. You sense it too, the hum of human ambition, the desire to weave identity into every thread. Someone bumps your shoulder. A courier hauling rolls of raw silk. Coming through, he calls. You step aside and watch him disappear into the crowd. That silk probably came from far off Byzantium, or maybe even China. The thought hits you. This tiny scrap of fabric you just touched traveled thousands of miles, through deserts, mountains and seas, changing hands like treasure, and now it lies here, under your fingertips, waiting to become someone's gown. You spot a tailor sketching a dress pattern in chalk on rough parchment. A special order, he says, without looking up. Lady wants something new. Shorter sleeves, tighter waist. Says it's the French way. You glance at the design and raise an eyebrow. Looks complicated. He chuckles. That's the point. If it's easy to wear, it's not expensive enough. You realize how much of medieval fashion was built on illusion, of effortlessness, grace, superiority. A good tailor was part craftsman, part magician. Every fold and pleat carried coded meaning. Wealth, virtue, taste, control. A boy approaches the stall, carrying a bucket of indigo paste. His hands are blue to the wrists. Hard day? You ask. He shrugs. Better blue than burned. My cousin works near the lime vats. You wince, imagining the caustic fumes. He grins anyway, but when the cloth comes out just right, feels like the sky itself. You nod. Maybe there's poetry, even in industrial accidents. Further down the market, you find stalls selling trimmings, buttons of carved bone, ribbons woven with gold thread, tiny glass beads. A woman demonstrates how to attach a row of pearls to a headdress without snapping the silk. Patience, she says, threading the needle through. The secret to beauty is patience. You're not starting to think that might have been the unofficial motto of the entire Middle Ages. As dusk rolls in, the market glows under lanterns. The colors shift in the soft light, becoming deeper, more mysterious. You pause at the edge, watching merchants pack away their wares, still arguing good-naturedly about whose cloth is finer, whose dye lasts longer, whose customers matter more. The smell of wool and dye lingers in the air, earthy and sharp, a scent that feels older than memory. You realize that medieval fashion wasn't just bizarre because of its shapes or extravagance. It was bizarre because of the effort, the sheer relentless labor behind every thread, every hue. It took villages to make a single outfit, oceans to produce a single shade. Behind every lord's robe was 1,000 hands that never got to wear it. You look down at your own clothes, modern fabric, perfect stitching, machine precision, and feel a quiet gratitude for the anonymous artists who once lived by dye vats and looms, weaving beauty into the bones of history. A cool wind slides through the emptying square, rustling the scraps of thread and stray feathers that litter the cobblestones. The sky overhead turns the same bruised purple as a dye master's fingers. You smile at the symmetry. Somewhere in the distance, A bell rings for evening prayer. The merchants bow their heads briefly, then go right back to haggling. Some things never change. You take one last look at the stalls, glowing faintly in the twilight, and think of how many colors have vanished from history. Pigments lost, recipes forgotten, shades that once existed only in dreams. But maybe, if you listen closely, you can still hear the whisper of the market, the rustle of silk, the murmur of artisans who believed color was a kind of magic and refused to live without it. The next morning, you find yourself wandering through a quieter corner of the town, a neighborhood that hums not with trade, but with the rhythm of needles, hammers, and spinning wheels. This is where fashion begins, before the courts and cathedrals, before the tournaments and portraits, the workshop district. The smell hits you first, a mix of wool grease, beeswax, and warm iron. You pass a small window where a seamstress leans close to the light, her fingers flashing as she stitches. Inside, apprentices spin flax into linen thread, their hands blurring with practiced repetition. The floor is dusted with scraps of fabric, curls of leather, bits of fur. It's messy, but in a living, breathing way. The sort of chaos that makes beauty possible. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval fashion depended on entire networks of specialized craftspeople, tailors, weavers, fullers, dyers, cobblers, embroiderers, metalworkers, all part of a vast system that clothed society from head to toe. The 14th century saw the rise of formal guilds, organizations that regulated skills, quality, and prices. Historians still argue whether guilds empowered artisans or trapped them in rigid hierarchies. But no one denies their impact. Without guilds, the wardrobe of Europe might have unraveled entirely. You step inside a tailor's shop. Watch your step, the tailor says, without looking up. He's marking a bolt of crimson wool with chalk, tongue poking out in concentration. I'm cutting for the Countess's new gown. Needs to fall just so, between elegance and sin. You grin. Is there much space between those? He chuckles. Only a hem's width. Around him, apprentices scurry. One measures ribbon, another sharpens shears, another hums quietly as she presses seams with a heated iron. You watch the tailor's hands move, swift, certain. Every cut is a risk. Cloth this fine costs more than some people's houses. He gestures for you to hold a length of fabric. See how it drapes? That's real craftsmanship. A good cloth should move like it's alive. You lift it carefully, and sure enough, it ripples like water. You imagine the Countess sweeping into a feast, her gown whispering around her ankles, and realize how much of that grace was engineered here, in this modest, cluttered room. A quirky tidbit: some tailors believed that singing while sewing brought good luck to the garment, and that a poorly hemmed sleeve could curse its wearer with bad fortune in love. You glance around. Half the room is quietly humming. Apparently, superstition doubles as workplace playlist. The tailor notices your smile. Superstitions, he says, shrugging. They keep the thread from tangling, or so I tell the apprentices. In the next workshop, the sound changes from soft to sharp. The air smells of leather and smoke. A cobbler hunches over a shoe form, tapping nails into a heel. You from the court? He asks, not looking up. No, you reply. Just curious. He nods. Good. Court people don't know what real shoes are. He turns the form and reveals a finished pair. Rich brown leather with a curved, pointed toe. so long it could double as a weapon. You made those? You ask. He grins. They're for a duke. He wants them 6 inches longer than fashion. Says it makes him look taller. You tilt your head. Does it? He shrugs. Makes him trip faster. Historians still argue whether such extreme footwear, poulains they were called, originated as a joke, a symbol of virility, or simply the human need to show off. Whatever the truth, it's clear that some medieval trends required equal parts confidence and balance. You step outside again, blinking in the sunlight. Across the street, an embroiderer's shop glows like a jewelry box. Inside, women sit in a semicircle, their needles flashing gold thread through velvet. Each stitch catches the light like a spark. Church commission, their master explains. Saints and angels for the bishop's vestments. We'll be working by candlelight for a week. One of the embroiderers looks up, smiling. We try to make them shine brighter than the sinners who'll see them. You laugh softly, admiring the audacity. At a nearby table, a young girl embroiders a border of vines, so delicate you almost miss the tiny animals hidden between the leaves. A rabbit, a fox, a snail. It keeps me awake, she says shyly. Otherwise the pattern gets boring. You nod, understanding that quiet rebellion has always found its way into the seams of history. Further down, the street opens into a tannery yard. You instantly regret entering. The stench is unforgettable. Rotting hides, lime, and something sulfurous that makes your eyes water. Beauty stinks, says the tanner, grinning as he stirs a vat of soaking leather with a long pole. But the nobles love soft boots. You watch him wring out a hide, the muscles in his arms straining. Every fine glove, he says, was once a week of this. It's humbling, seeing the hidden labor behind elegance, the dirty, dangerous parts nobody in silk ever smelled. You pause, taking it all in. The rhythmic clang of hammers, the hiss of steam, the murmur of prayers from the embroiderer's shop. This is fashion's underworld, the forge of luxury. Every noble splendor begins here, with hands that blister and voices that hum to stay sane. As you walk toward the end of the street, a guild banner flaps overhead, a golden needle on blue cloth. You think about how these workers formed their own hierarchies, their own kind of pride. A master tailor could hold as much respect as a minor noble. A skilled weaver could pass down her secrets like a family treasure. Historians still argue, you murmur, whether guilds protected artisans or just kept them obedient. Maybe both. But standing here, surrounded by the hum of creation, you sense that pride was their armor. They might not have worn jewels, but they made the world's jewels possible. Evening drifts in, the last sunlight turning the street gold. You hear laughter spilling from a nearby tavern. Tailors, cobblers, dyers, drinking away the day's fatigue. One raises his mug and shouts, "To the threads that hold up kings." The others cheer, foam sloshing. You smile, feeling that toast echo across centuries. You walk away slowly, the smell of leather and dye clinging faintly to your clothes. Behind you, someone begins humming again, a soft, steady tune that blends with the sound of spinning wheels. It's the lullaby of labor, ancient and enduring, the heartbeat behind every shimmering gown and polished boot. As you turn the corner, the hum fades, replaced by the distant toll of a church bell. For a moment, you imagine every stitch, every seam, every hand that shaped history's wardrobe. Not the nobles, but the makers, the quiet heroes of the bazaar. The church bell you heard fades into a slower rhythm as you find yourself walking through shadowed streets where the cobblestones gleam with damp. Ahead rises the outline of a cathedral, its towers spearing into clouds. The scent of incense rolls out through the open doors, mingling with candle smoke and the faint musk of old wood and stone. Inside, fashion takes on a different kind of authority, not a matter of vanity this time, but of virtue. You step into the glow of hundreds of candles and see figures in layered robes of deep scarlet, black, and shimmering gold. Their garments rustle softly as they move, woven not to impress mortal eyes, but to honor divine ones. Or at least, that's the official line. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, the church dictated much of what people could wear, from clergy vestments to lay people's hemlines. Sumptuary laws tied clothing to morality. Certain fabrics and colors were reserved for the powerful or the pious. Historians still argue whether these laws truly upheld spiritual order or simply reinforced social control. But in either case, religion and fashion were stitched together by sacred thread. You watch a procession begin down the nave. Priests in long copes sweep past, the fabric glinting in candlelight. Every color means something. White for purity, red for martyrdom, green for renewal, purple for penance. Gold, of course, is for glory. The embroidery along the hems catches your eye. Tiny scenes of saints and vines twisting together like prayers woven into thread. A young acolyte notices your gaze and whispers, "Each robe takes months." The bishop's was made in Venice, imported silk lined with ermine. He says it with the same reverence one might reserve for relics. You nod solemnly, trying not to think of the poor embroiderers you met yesterday, who probably worked by candlelight until their eyes blurred. Still, it's hard not to be moved. The garments gleam like liquid light, and when the choir begins to sing, the robes themselves seem to move with the music. You realize this is performance, too. Divine pageantry designed to awe. A quirky tidbit. Some clerics secretly competed to have the most resplendent vestments, commissioning gold-threaded fabrics despite vows of modesty. There is a 13th century letter in which one monk scolds another for dressing as if the Lord's Supper were a coronation. You smile softly. Even holiness, you whisper, couldn't resist a little sparkle. Outside the cathedral, you wander through a graveyard of quiet stone angels. The chill wind tugs at your sleeve, and the faint echo of chanting lingers behind you. Across the square, a group of pilgrims kneel before a roadside shrine. Their clothes tell another story entirely. Faded, patched, simple, the opposite of the jeweled clergy inside. Yet somehow, their humility has its own kind of dignity. You sit near them for a moment, watching as they pray, hands trembling from exhaustion. One woman's cloak is mended so many times it looks like a quilt of memories. "I've been walking for 3 weeks," she says, when she catches your eye. "Every patch, a town I passed through." You trace the seams with your gaze. Some are red wool, some gray linen, one square of fine silk that must have been a gift. "That's beautiful," you tell her. She smiles faintly. "It keeps me warm. That's all I ask." Historians still argue whether the church's obsession with appearance, clean robes, bright vestments, precise veiling, was meant to inspire or intimidate. Watching her, you suspect it was both. You stand and wander toward a monastery at the edge of town. Inside, monks move in silence, their robes rough, and unadorned. The contrast from the cathedral is startling. No color, no gold, just brown wool and bare feet. One monk nods to you, his eyes calm. You ask softly, "Don't you ever want to wear something finer?" He smiles. "Once, maybe, but comfort is louder than color." He leads you into a workshop where they weave cloth for their own habits. The loom creaks, its rhythm meditative. "We weave for ourselves," he says, "and for the poor." The thread reminds us that labor and humility are prayers too. You run your fingers across the coarse cloth. It's scratchy, plain, yet there's something peaceful in it. A little joke slips into your thoughts. "Medieval minimalism," you murmur. The monk glances up, amused. You could say that. As the sun begins to set, you step outside again. The sky glows amber behind the cathedral towers, and the stained glass windows blaze like jewels. From this distance, the building looks less like stone and more like a colossal tapestry of light. You realize that medieval people lived inside art. Even their worship came wrapped in color and form. And yet, for all the grandeur, there was fear too. Fear of dressing wrong, of seeming impious, of drawing the wrong kind of gaze. A merchant once fined for wearing scarlet wrote bitterly that color is for kings and cardinals. The rest of us must live in shadows. You think about that, about how control over beauty can become a kind of quiet cruelty. The evening bells toll, echoing through the city. A group of friars passes you, their hoods drawn, their sandals whispering on the stones. Between them walks a noblewoman in a shimmering blue gown, veil trailing like water. The friars glance sideways, half judgment, half admiration. She pretends not to notice. You smile faintly. "Fashion diplomacy," you whisper. As night settles, the cathedral bells grow softer, blending with the rustle of the wind through trees. You realize how deeply faith shaped the aesthetics of the age, not just in vestments, but in everyday choices. The divine dictated the silhouette of life itself. You take a slow breath. Somewhere between sin and sanctity, between gold thread and brown wool, lies the heart of medieval fashion, the tension between wanting to be seen and wanting to be saved. You turn from the cathedral, your footsteps quiet on the cobblestones. Behind you, the candles still burn, 1,000 tiny flames flickering through stained glass, like stars trapped in stone. You leave the cathedral's glow behind and drift into the chill of the night. The moon hangs low, spilling silver across the narrow streets, and you follow the sound of distant laughter toward a place where the solemnity of the church gives way to something far less sacred, an inn packed with travelers, merchants, and a few people whose professions you probably shouldn't ask about. Inside, the warmth hits you like a wool blanket. Firelight flickers over faces painted in ale and mischief. You notice how much looser fashion becomes after sunset. The stiff collars and pious veils of daytime are gone. In their place, laced bodices loosen, hats tilt rakishly, and sleeves roll up as easily as inhibitions. You grab a stool and order a drink. The tavern keeper, a woman with a laugh that could shatter pewter, slams down a mug of something sweet and foamy. "You're new," she says. "Don't worry. We won't bite unless you're worth it." You take a sip. It's strong enough to knock the starch out of any noble's ruff. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval taverns and fairs were fashion's testing grounds. Outside the scrutiny of court and clergy, people experimented with daring cuts, bright colors, and fabrics borrowed from every trade route. Historians still argue whether these gatherings sparked true trends or just local chaos, but there's no denying they were incubators of creativity. The original street-style scene: a minstrel starts strumming a lute, and the crowd begins to move. You notice a man in a striped doublet, the pattern so loud it could scare livestock. Italian style, he boasts when you compliment him. All the rage in Milan. You nod appreciatively. Looks aerodynamic. He grins. It helps with dancing. Next to him, a woman wears a gown slashed at the sleeves, revealing bright crimson fabric beneath. It's bold, playful, and maybe just scandalous enough to make the church elders faint. Imported cloth, she says proudly, but stitched by my own hands. Why let nobles have all the fun? You admire her defiance. She's not just wearing fashion, she's claiming it. You realize how much the tavern crowd mirrors modern nightlife. Fashion here is rebellion, wrapped in laughter. It's people saying, we may not be rich, but we can look unforgettable. A quirky tidbit: sumptuary laws often tried to ban commoners from wearing certain fabrics or colors, but enforcement was nearly impossible. Some towns even passed night exemptions, where festival goers could dress above their rank until dawn. You can't help but grin. So, medieval cosplay was officially sanctioned. You whisper. At the next table, two tailors argue about sleeve length. Shorter sleeves show confidence. One insists. Longer sleeves show grace. The other retorts. Their debate nearly devolves into a duel of measuring tapes. You half expect someone to pull out a ruler and settle it once and for all. Historians still argue whether fashion really trickled down from nobles to peasants, or whether ordinary people invented trends from below. Watching this room, you suspect it went both ways. Inspiration traveled faster than permission. You step outside for air, where the fairgrounds stretch into the night. Lanterns swinging, music drifting, merchants shouting over the din. Stalls sell masks, ribbons, glass beads, and perfumed oils. You pass a juggler, balancing on a barrel, while wearing what looks like half a nobleman-s outfit and half a fool-s. Half price, he calls. You toss him a coin. Half talent? You tease. Full heart, he shoots back. Touché. Further down, a group of dancers whirl around a bonfire, their clothes a blur of color. You notice how movement transforms everything. The same gowns and tunics that seemed stiff by day now ripple and flare, alive with rhythm. That's the secret, someone says beside you. Clothes aren't meant to sit still. They live when we move. You turn to find an older woman watching the dancers, her cloak trimmed in faded gold. Used to dance like that myself, she says, back when silk still felt like a promise. You ask what she means. She smiles sadly. Fashion's a kind of memory. It keeps us young even when we stop fitting into it. You think of all the strange silhouettes you've seen tonight. Short tunics, layered skirts, bright belts, jeweled hoods. It's messy and joyful. 1,000 micro-revolutions twirling under the same moon. Near the edge of the fair, a mask maker sells his wares. Fox faces, angels, demons, painted with unsettling detail. Carnival soon, he says. Everyone wants to be someone else for a night. You pick up a half mask, shaped like a falcon's beak. What's this one mean? He shrugs. Depends on who wears it. You slip it on, and for a moment, the world shifts. The music sounds sharper, the lights brighter. You catch your reflection in a brass plate. Half your face is you, half something wild. Maybe that's what fashion always was, a small, glittering lie we tell to feel larger than our skin. The night deepens, fires burn low, couples drift away arm in arm, their laughter dissolving into the dark. Vendors pack their wares. Someone strums a last, wistful tune. You linger, reluctant to leave the glow of so much life, so much self-expression stitched out of scraps. A sudden chill wind sweeps through the fair, lifting a few loose ribbons into the air. They twist together before vanishing into the shadows, like the ghosts of every festival that's ever been. As you head back toward town, you glance down at your sleeve. It's faintly dusted with glitter from someone's costume. You brush it away, but can't quite erase the shimmer. Some fashions, you murmur, follow you home, whether you like it or not. You pause at the edge of the square. Behind you, the faint strains of music fade into silence. Ahead lies the castle, sleeping beneath the stars, waiting for the next morning's ceremony, the next chance for someone to turn fabric into legend. You smile to yourself, realizing that fashion, no matter the century, always returns to the same stage, the space between who we are and who we hope to be. The morning air is crisp again, washed clean by dew and quiet after the long night's revelry. You follow a road that winds toward a great castle on the hill, its towers glinting faintly in the dawn. The smell of smoke and damp wool lingers in the air, and the first rays of light spill across banners fluttering from high battlements. A page rushes past you, carrying a tray of gleaming jewelry, crowns, rings, and brooches, catching the sunrise like fragments of molten gold. Inside the castle courtyard, the hum of preparation fills the air. Servants dart between rooms with armfuls of fabric, while nobles stand like living mannequins, allowing tailors to pin, drape, and fuss. The day's event is a royal pageant, and the entire court is dressing not merely to impress, but to outshine heaven itself. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, royal and noble courts turned fashion into a diplomatic weapon. What you wore wasn't just taste, it was politics, a language of alliances and ambition. The more elaborate the outfit, the more power it whispered. Historians still argue whether the late medieval style explosion marked cultural progress or the first great arms race of vanity. You wander among the nobles like a ghost, invisible but present. One duchess is being sewn, literally sewn, into her gown, the tailor's needle flashing between breaths. The fabric gleams like liquid metal, stiff with gold thread and pearls. Can she even walk in that? You whisper. Her maid sighs. Barely. But when she enters the hall, everyone else will stop breathing. So it evens out. Nearby, a young lord inspects his reflection in a polished shield. His tunic is slashed and puffed to display layers of contrasting silk beneath, each slice edged in embroidery. Do you think the king will notice? He asks his attendant. The servant smiles thinly. Only if you faint under the weight of it. You glance at his shoes, needle-toed, absurdly long. How do you even stand in those? He winks. Gracefully. Mostly. Jewels clink softly everywhere. Necklaces of coral and amber, jeweled girdles looping around waists, belts heavy with pendants that shimmer when they move. One man's hat boasts an entire feathered heron, perched like a pet. You wonder whether the bird gave its consent. A quirky tidbit. There is a 15th century French account of a courtier so obsessed with pearls that he ordered his tailor to sew them into his undergarments, to feel nobility close to his skin. You smile to yourself. Fashion is intimacy. Apparently, trumpets sound from the great hall. The courtiers gather, forming a glittering parade of texture and ego. You slip inside and find the chamber ablaze with light. Chandeliers drip wax and gold, walls shimmer with tapestries depicting knights, saints, and suspiciously well-dressed angels. The line between heaven and haute couture has never been thinner. The king enters, wrapped in a robe so heavy it takes 2 pages to carry the train. It's trimmed with ermine, embroidered with suns, and clasped with a sapphire the size of your thumb. His Majesty's presence, someone murmurs, reverently, outshines the dawn. You're tempted to reply, and probably outweighs it too. When the court bows, the air moves like a single fabric. You watch their sleeves sweep the floor, their jewels sparkle, their perfumes mingle. It's a choreography of color, deliberate, practiced, intoxicating. Every outfit is a statement, every glance a calculation. Historians still argue whether medieval fashion reached absurdity or artistry here at its height. You're inclined to think it was both. Beauty weaponized, elegance exaggerated until it collapsed under its own perfection. As the ceremony unfolds, minstrels play soft melodies. Courtiers exchange glances, sharp as daggers, smiles hiding rivalries stitched in silk. The Duchess in her golden gown glides forward, radiant and pale. You can almost hear the collective inhale of envy. Bizarre, you whisper, but breathtaking. Later, when the feast begins, you slip away to the balcony. The air outside feels cool and clean, stripped of perfume and noise. Below, the village stirs. The same people you saw in the workshops and markets. Children chase chickens between mud walls. Women hang laundry like banners of reality. From up here, the contrast is dizzying. You lean on the stone railing, watching the first light creep over the fields. You think about all the layers you've seen on this journey. The absurd shoes, the jeweled hairnets, the toxic cosmetics, the gilded armor. How every era and every class dressed itself in symbols, in dreams, in defenses. How fashion has always been part disguise, part declaration. You laugh softly. Maybe it wasn't bizarre, you say to the morning. Maybe it was just human. The castle bell tolls in the distance, echoing down to the village and out across the countryside. The sound seems to dissolve the gap between silk and homespun, between crowns and cobblers. For a brief, golden moment, everyone exists under the same sky, just people choosing what to wear, hoping it might make them a little more seen, a little more themselves. And so, as the sun climbs higher, you turn from the castle, ready to let the strange beauty of the Middle Ages fade like embroidery into dusk. But before you go, one last thought lingers. Fashion, in the end, outlasts everything. Kingdoms crumble, languages vanish, faiths evolve, but the desire to adorn, to express, to transform, never dies. You smile, feeling that truth settle like a soft cloak around your shoulders. And now, as you drift closer to sleep, let the sounds of this medieval world fade. The chatter of merchants, the rustle of gowns, the ring of a hammer in the guild street, all dimming, one by one. Picture the colors you be walked through tonight. The deep woad blue of a dyer esvat, the shimmering gold of a bishop's robe, the silver gleam of armor under torchlight. See them slowly blending together. melting into a soft, warm gray. You're standing once more in the quiet courtyard outside the castle, but now the banners hang still, the torches gutter low, and only the hush of distant wind remains. The air smells faintly of rain and lavender, that old medieval perfume that never quite leaves your imagination. You feel the weight of centuries slide away, the layers of silk and chainmail, the powdered faces, the restless vanity. Beneath it all, there's just skin and breath, and the steady rhythm of hearts that once beat under those strange, beautiful clothes. The past exhales, and the silence feels tender. Let your shoulders drop. Picture a single candle beside you, its flame steady, its glow softening every edge. Whatever noise fills your own world, let it drift back in time for a moment. Maybe fashion's real magic was never about how people looked, but how they wanted to feel: worthy, graceful, alive, and maybe tonight you can borrow a bit of that feeling before you sleep. So breathe in once more, slow, deep, easy, and let the Middle Ages fade to mist. The candle flickers, the air cools, and everything strange turns still and safe. Good night, traveler of time. Sleep well, dream in color, and wake simple.